So we were looking at world trade. So in the world market, the price in the world market is $1,500 for a plasma screen TV. So how many TVs will we import or export? We figured that out. We said that domestically, consumers want 600 TVs at $1,500. In our country, we're only going to produce 200 at a price of $1,500. So then we need to import how many? 400 to cover that distance between. Okay, so that's where we were on Thursday. It seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Okay, so without trade, consumer surplus is A. Without trade, this is our equilibrium quantity here and equilibrium price at 300. So consumer surplus is A. When we trade, we add, or I'm sorry, without trade, our producer surplus is B and C. Okay, below that equilibrium price. I'll review for a couple of chapters now, right? Okay, so when we trade, we're going to add B and D to our consumer surplus. So our new consumer surplus is significant, right? Consumer surplus is a good or a bad thing? Good. All surplus is a good thing, right? So what is our total surplus now? Awesome, right? This is awesome total surplus. And what did we gain from engaging in international trade? D. That is significant gain from trade. If you choose to trade the right things, then trade will always
make everyone better, unless you're Omega.
Okay. Are we good here? Good review, refresher. Now you remember where we were? Ish. Okay. So the welfare effects of trade. When the price domestically is less than the price of the world, you should export. When the price domestically is less than the price of the world, your consumer surplus will fall and your producer surplus will rise, and your total surplus will rise. What do you suppose we should put in this column? When price of the domestic is greater than the price of the world, then we should import. Right? If we can get it cheaper in the world, we should import. Consumer surplus rises, producer surplus falls, but total surplus rises. So no matter what, whether your price is higher or lower than the world, if you do the right thing with it, you increase your total surplus, thus trade. Yay. If you learn nothing all semester, you'll know that, won't you?
Aaron, you don't even know what that means. Eric just says it, he doesn't know what it means.
Think about this statement like the World Series. Okay? The Kansas City Royals, San Francisco Giants, right? We trade cities for the games, right? Both cities benefit and reap pretty tremendous economic rewards. One team is going to lose, ultimately, but it will still have won.
There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Even if you lose the World Series, you're still better off because you were there, because you got those economic benefits. Alrighty, other benefits of international trade. An increased variety of goods. Here in Nebraska, you would not know grapefruit and oranges and lemons and limes. There would be many, many months of the year when you would not have fresh vegetables and fresh fruits. You would have plenty of beef and chicken and pork, but probably not a lot of seafood, no lobster and clams and crabs. You would have bass and trout, but pretty limited in the wintertime, right?
Nice fishy.
Yeah. What? All right, so increased variety of goods. Have we done the check the label on your clothing thing? Okay. How many of you would be half naked without global trade? Yeah. Right.
I'd rather be
Almost all of you would be barefoot without global trade. You would not have calculators in your math classes. Most of us wouldn't have watches. You would not have cell phones. So far as I understand it, there's no cell phone manufactured in the United States.
good. That's what they pay Chinese people with.
Okay. Producers sell to larger markets and thus are able to make more and reduce their costs. It's called economy of scale. So they can provide what they make to everybody domestically and at the world market for a lower cost of production. That's a huge thing. There are a lot of businesses that would not even go into business if they could only operate domestically, because their costs would be too high for what the domestic demand would be. Does that make some sense? Can you imagine how much an American-made car would cost if there was no global trade? If they had to absorb the cost of production just in what they sold in the United States? It would be tremendously expensive. At the same time, having to compete on the global market can increase competition for domestic firms, force them to maintain competitive prices, and increase total welfare. Remember, the word welfare is being used in a different context here, right? This is not the welfare you think of as a government handout. This is total well-being, right? Yeah, whatever, Hoke. We're busy copying down the words on the screen.
At least you know.
Now that you've gotten it written down and thought about it for a second, does it make sense? Okay. And if you remember from your World Civ class, as the Crusades stimulated trade and helped bring about the Renaissance, and the Renaissance helped bring about the Reformation, and the Reformation helped bring about the end of absolutism, coupled with the Enlightenment, etc., as the trade and the spread of information accelerated, total welfare globally was increased.
He basically just wrote your final for next semester.
Yeah, connect the Crusades to the
Yep.
Industrial.
To Napoleon.
Pretty sure that was.
And it took.
First semester final.
I've never
Yep.
written so long before in my life.
Yep.
I spent 3 hours on that review.
But it is a total string. You can follow it all the way, can't you?
We explored that it's not a string. It's like you jump.
Well, yeah, it's more like a spider web, but it is connected. Okay, so if trade is so great, if trade is so wonderful, if it truly does make everyone better off,
You're Omega.
then what? Who is Omega?
From the stupid test.
Where's the
That
word?
trade was not right.
Grandma had like an advantage.
They're not good. It's not
He's
good
like, should they
trade.
trade? And I'm like, why
No.
do they have to? to, and then you were like, trade makes everybody better off.
It does.
No, it didn't. Gamma should never trade with Omega. I still never heard about it.
Clearly.
That cost me a point.
I just want that point back.
Okay, so as you learned in chapter 1, trade can make everyone better off as long as they do it right.
See, you can.
If you don't trade what you're best at, then you're going to make yourself worse.
But they weren't good at anything.
They were good at both things.
Comparative advantage. Trade what you have comparative advantage in, not absolute.
BS. They were split.
No, absolute doesn't matter. Trade in what you have a comparative advantage in. And they did have a comparative advantage. Okay, so the winners from trade can pay the losers more because they are the losers in trade, which then makes them better off while the winners are still better off. The real world problem is that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, because then the winner is like, I can be even more better off
Exactly.
if I didn't have to do it.
Exactly. The winner says I could be even more better off if I didn't make you whole, so forget you. I'm more better off. So when there are losers in trade, they feel that pain more deeply. They are getting rawly and severely ripped off. Okay? We are beginning to see some easing of this situation. Can anyone think of a trade situation where the losers are losing big time? How about Malaysian workers in the Nike shoe factories who get like 8 cents an hour? Okay? But as legislation is passed that eliminates those kind of loopholes, those workers get better off. It used to be that China was where you sent everything to be made because their workers were so poorly compensated. And yet now we're facing a lot of global repercussions, both environmentally and in terms of scarce natural resources, because Chinese workers are now so well paid that almost all of them can afford at least one vehicle in their family, which means that they're all desiring fossil fuels and burning them, etc. So in the short run, this is intense. In the long run, it gets somewhat mitigated. Okay. At the same time, the losses are felt amongst a small group, so are the huge benefits, and those don't get spread out. How many of you have heard a commentary piece on the news about how much the average worker's salary has gone up compared to how much the CEO of Morgan Stanley's compensation has gone up? Over the past 10 years, compared to inflation, the average worker has gotten about a 0.7% raise. That is miserable. Okay? In 1 year, the CEO of Morgan Stanley got a 25% raise.
Nice.
0.7% of your average income, say 40,000, which is high. Okay, 0.7% of 40,000 would be 1% of 40,000 would be what? Move your decimal over 2. $400. So 0.7% would be $280.
Over how many years?
10. That's taking inflation into account. Now, the CEO of Morgan Stanley, at the time he got the 25% raise, his total compensation package was over $3 million. And that was 1 year. I'm sure he did. Okay.
What is that?
So the losers here have more incentive to organize and lobby for restrictions on trade. Who lobbies for restrictions on trade? A good instance in history is steel workers. Chinese steel is less expensive because China does not have the environmental restrictions on its steel production companies. Our steel production, our steel manufacturers have to account for their industrial waste. They have OSHA to deal with, and so they have to make sure that their workers are protected in a safe environment. The steel workers are unionized, so they have wages that are decent wages. They have benefits like medical and retirement and vacation days and sick days. The Chinese workers don't have those things, so Chinese steel, much less expensive. Our steel workers recognize that if we're buying Chinese steel, our steel is going to be far more expensive and not purchased, right? Price domestic, price world. Yes? Okay, think the plasma TV example. And so what do our steel workers do? They take some of their steel worker union dues and they hire a lobbyist to go to Congress to put a tariff on the import of Chinese steel so that you have price domestic instead of price Chinese, price domestic, price Chinese. You're still going to sell Chinese steel here, but just not as much, so the loss won't be as great for our workers. Make sense? So where does the benefit come if our workers aren't going to be selling as much American-made steel and they're going to be losing jobs, factories are going to go out of business, then how do we benefit from that trade? The answer is the steel worker who loses his job may not. But all of the rest of you are driving cars made out of cheaper steel, which means that your cars are cheaper. And you go to work in office buildings built with cheaper steel. And you drive on bridges. And your goods are transported on trains that run on steel rails. And overall, the benefit of the cheaper steel impacts our nation positively. But it impacts that small group more painfully. Do you understand the distinction now between how we all benefit from trade, but some are hurt? Does that help a little?
Trade can make most everyone.
Well, and ultimately, even those steel workers who are put out of work are going to benefit because their cars are cheaper too. Their goods in the grocery store are cheaper too. It's just that their benefit isn't as much. Okay, so tariff is a tax on imports. We have throughout history, we the United States have utilized tariffs a great deal. In fact, you could say that Hawaii became part of the United States because of a tariff. If you know your U.S. history. Okay, cotton shirts. The price of a cotton shirt on the world market is $20. We add a tariff of $10 a shirt. So now to buy that imported shirt, you're going to pay $30. You guys math so well. Okay. So domestic producers of cotton shirts now, to compete on the world market, can sell their shirts for $30 here in the U.S. So the price facing domestic buyers and sellers is the world price plus the tariff. And we still use T for tariff because a tariff is still a tax. There's not a different abbreviation. Now, what do you have to assume if we are taxing imports? You have to assume that the world price must be higher or lower than the domestic price. Lower. It has to be lower. If the price on the world market is already higher than what it costs domestically, why would you tax it? People aren't going to buy it anyway. So, the price of the world market of a cotton shirt, $20. At $20, our buyers want 80 shirts. But here domestically at $20, we're only going to produce 25. Uh-oh, we need to import, oh, it's not a perfectly even round number. Oh dear, 55 shirts. Okay. But if we put a tariff in place, what's going to happen to this price? It's going to go up $10 to $30. Our new demand at $30 is 70 shirts. Our new domestic supply is 40 shirts, and so we now only need to import 30 shirts. Our domestic producers are better off by 15 shirts and by $10 a shirt. But those 15 people are paying $10 more a shirt. Actually, those 70 people are paying $10 more a shirt, and now there are 10 people who don't get a shirt. At that price, yeah. I no longer want that shirt.
I don't think I'd pay $30 for a shirt.
Stop being,
Rational?
yes.
Sorry.
Okay. So, what is consumer surplus if we have free trade? No tariff. Free trade. No tariff. But we have trade.
Isn't it AC?
AC is if we don't have trade. We have trade. We have free trade. So what is our price? What is our price? $20. So now, where is free trade? What is consumer surplus? A, B, F, E, D, and C. The whole big triangle above. Right. Do you understand, Zach? Okay. Where's producer surplus? G. So then total surplus is all that there. All right. Measure our tariff. What's our tariff cost us? Or I'm sorry, free trade with the tariff. Or free trade with the tariff. Consumer surplus with the tariff is AB. Consumer surplus, or I'm sorry, producer surplus with the tariff is CG. New concept. Revenue. Not deadweight loss. Revenue. E. Revenue is E. That's how much more they're making as a result of that tariff. Yes, Michael.
Why would producer surplus go up after the tariff? What it used to was PG, now it's C plus.
Because the price went up. Yeah, producer surplus is always below the price to the left of the curve. So now the price is here to the left of the curve. They're selling a higher quantity at a higher price. They get a lot more surplus. Okay. Now, so what's total surplus now? A, B, C, E, G is correct. Why not? Why not D and F?
That's dead weight loss.
Boom.
Oh. Wow, Kyle. Will it always be symmetrical? Wait, that's like, oh, that's good.
Why is it dead weight loss, Kyle? It's loss. Because, guys, we did it in that order for a reason. When the price was 20, when we had free trade, all of this that is colored was total surplus. When we raised the price, we decreased consumer surplus to AB. We increased producer surplus to CG. We had additional revenue of E. And we lost D and F. Why do you still get E? What? Yeah. Kind of awesome how, if you go through the sequence, how simple it is, but how complex it looks once you're done. Yes?
Yes.
There are practice problems at the end of the chapter that ask you to do this. You will have to do this on your chapter quiz. I suggest you start the chapter problems tonight. All right. Dead weight loss here represents overproduction of shirts. Dashby's face is just so perplexed. But why? The dead weight loss is what you give up when you add the tariff. So these 10 extra shirts are overproduced. Yes? Why is D dead weight loss? We're still selling 40 shirts. But we would have only sold 25. So why is D overproduction? It's not dead weight gain.
Didn't they join the market?
They left the market because
What, they moved the market?
yeah, they left the market.
D left the market?
I understand what
Or
sellers.
Yeah, they're suppliers, right? So D
Like
left,
the
so-
exporters from other countries.
Yeah, D is suppliers.
Yeah.
They left the market.
D is imported.
Yeah.
Our producers aren't making it. It's the loss to our domestic producers.
Yeah, they got
dead weight loss.
Yes.
So is F producers too?
F is what is lost because of the increase in price. I used to want to buy 80. Now that the price went up $10, I only want to buy 70.
So then D is
D is those shirts.
other countries.
Yeah, domestically we're only producing 40. They're not going to export 15 shirts to us anymore. They're like, forget it. It's not worth it to us at that price.
Don't they both have to be like consumers?
No. Because there's two curves. There's producers and consumers on the graph. Both are affected by the import tariff. Have you read?
I have not.
Okay, I think the book does a fine job of explaining this. I think it does it pretty clearly. Anybody who has read want to testify to that?
I bet you actually read it too.
I bet he actually didn't read it.
I read the first pages.
The first 2 pages, yeah. So I'm going to impose a tariff on your exports of BS.
How much?
Yeah, how much?
Okay.
Why are you importing BS?
What?
Why are you importing BS?
Well, he's forcing it on me. He's smuggling it over my borders.
Well, he might as
Okay.
well now.
So D is from overproduction, F is from underconsumption. It's all still loss.
It's like cocaine.
It's not at all like cocaine. All right.
You know what Aaron did this weekend?
Uh-huh. So, tariffs are taxes on imports. We can also allow imports to come in at their natural price, but we can restrict the quantity. That's called a quota, when you limit the number coming in. Can you envision what this is going to look like on a graph, boys and girls? It's a vertical line instead of a horizontal one, off of the quantity axis instead of the price axis. Dashby, you look like you're having a stroke. Are you okay? Okay. An import quota is a limit on the quantity coming in. It primarily has the same effects as a tariff, because if we limit the quantity coming in, that is going to have an impact upon price. It's going to raise the price and reduce the quantity of imports. It is going to help or hurt buyers. It's going to hurt. Anytime you raise the price, you're going to hurt buyers. Okay? Who is better off? Sellers' welfare. Sellers' welfare is increased. Domestic sellers, definitely. Foreign sellers are also improved. Even though they get a smaller quantity, they're still better off trading. Yeah. A tariff creates revenue for the government. Yes? It's an income source. A quota creates profits for the foreign producers because they get to sell it at a higher price and keep the difference.
Wow.
So guess which one we use more often? Tariffs. Because if the result is the same, why would the government not want the income? Yes? Oh, that's a very fair question. Why use the quota at all?
Because Obama.
Those are production quotas, not trade quotas.
Could it be like how companies now like
Chuck, I'm going to have to research the answer to that question. I do not have an answer for that off the top of my head. Foiled again. Ethan, get out of your lap.
That's disgusting.
Have some respect.
Okay. The government can say, here's an import quota, and if you want to exceed that, we'll sell you a license that allows you to do so, which is where they then recapture that lost revenue. This isn't done much anymore. Trade is too massive at this point.
We should go back to like the 1800s.
Okay. So what are the arguments that are used by those in favor of trade restrictions? Jobs. American jobs. Trade destroys jobs. If we import that Chinese steel, there's going to be workers out of work in the Rust Belt. Is that wrong? That's right. But an economist says are those imports actually causing unemployment? Are those imports actually causing unemployment? Because what happens if you get forced out of work? You get some retraining, you find another job, because trade doesn't just reduce employment in some places, it can increase employment in some places. If workers go out of work in steel manufacturing facilities as a result of increased trade, somebody else has got a job working on the cargo ship or on the port or transporting it or assembling the steel, building the building, etc., etc. It may not be the same dude. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. Imports as a percentage of GDP have gone up significantly, yes? From just over 4% to just under 16% in 50 years. That's pretty significant trade growth, okay? Let's look at historic unemployment. What would you expect it to look like if this argument is valid? If the argument is valid, unemployment should follow this same curve, correct?
Yeah. Look at that, we're lower.
Unemployment as a percentage of our total labor force is barely higher. What you're looking at, peak in the middle, is what's known as the Reagan recession. All right. So the economist's response is total unemployment doesn't go down as imports go up because job losses from imports are offset by job gains in export industries. The more we bring in, the more other nations are willing to accept our exports, because trade is what is known as reciprocal. You may be familiar with the phrase, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. You buy my stuff and I'll buy yours. You guys have engaged in reciprocal trade from your very earliest days of schooling. Oh man, Oreos again. What have you got? You got Twinkies? I'll give you 3 Oreos for your Twinkie. That is reciprocal trade. If all you had was carrot sticks, were you going to get to trade?
Heck no.
Okay. Here's your omega gamma. Even if all goods could be produced more cheaply abroad, even if everything was made with a foreign absolute advantage, so long as you have a comparative advantage in one thing, you can benefit from trade. Get good at something. Be the best at something. Guys, this works for your life as well. You will not want for work if you are the best at something. We will start